The night shift at Meadow Pines. The first time James Collins saw her standing there, he almost didn't stop. It was 3:12 in the morning. The hallway of Meadow Pines stretched long and quiet in both directions. The kind of quiet that only exists in places where people go to wait. She stood at the far end of the corridor, perfectly still, her back to him. A small woman in a white cotton nightgown facing a blank, painted wall. He called her name. She didn't turn. He walked toward her slowly, his sneakers barely making a sound on the linoleum. And when he was close enough, he asked the question that would stay with him for the rest of his life.
Dorothy, what do you see?
She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, without turning her head,
I'm waiting for them to leave.
James smiled, assumed she was confused, half asleep. He didn't know yet that 3 people were dying in the rooms around him. And he didn't know that this conversation, the simple act of speaking to her, had just saved his life. James Collins was 26 years old in October of 2019. He wasn't a nurse. He wasn't a caregiver by calling. He needed money, and Meadow Pines was hiring for the overnight shift, the hours no one wanted. The facility sat at the edge of a small town in rural Vermont. 32 residents, 3 staff on nights, long hallways that smelled of lavender and industrial cleaner. The kind of place that existed between the world of the living and whatever came after it. The work was hard but clear. Rounds every 2 hours, medications on schedule, entries in the log. James was good at it. He kept his head down. He learned everyone's name. For 3 weeks, nothing unusual happened. And then came the Friday night in early November. It was just after 1 in the morning when he first noticed Dorothy Hayes standing in the hallway. 81 years old, quiet woman, kept to herself. Of all the residents at Meadow Pines, she was the one James had spoken to least. Not from neglect, but because she seemed to prefer it that way. She was facing the wall at the end of the east corridor, not moving, not making a sound. He assumed she'd wandered out in a daze. It happens with elderly patients. He walked her back to her room. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. She was asleep before her head touched the pillow. He mentioned it to the day nurse in the morning. She shrugged. Night wandering. Completely normal. The next night, Dorothy was there again. Same spot, same posture, same wall. He checked the clock. 3:12. James went back to the nurse's station and opened the log. He cross-referenced the previous night. And there it was. On the first night Dorothy stood in that hallway, Thomas Webb in room 7 had died at 3:19. Heart failure. Completely expected. He'd been in declining health for weeks. Unremarkable. James told himself it was a coincidence. He wrote it down anyway. He told himself that for 6 weeks. By the 12th night, James had logged 11 instances. He'd stopped telling himself it was coincidence. He clocked in at 10, did his rounds, drank his coffee, watched the clock. At 3:11, he was already standing at the end of the hall. At 3:12, Dorothy appeared. Same white nightgown, same wall, same absolute stillness. James walked toward her slowly. His heart was doing something he didn't want to name. He stood beside her, and he asked,
Dorothy, what do you see?
She didn't turn. She was quiet for a long time. Then, in a voice so calm it made his skin crawl.
I'm waiting for them to leave.
Who?
He said.
Who needs to leave, Dorothy?
Another long pause. The fluorescent light above them hummed.
The ones who come for the others. They stand at the doors. There are many tonight. More than usual.
What are they doing?
His voice was barely above a whisper.
Waiting. Same as me. And you? Why are you here? Why do you stand in the hallway?
Dorothy finally moved. Just slightly. She tilted her head, the way a person does when the answer seems obvious.
Because they don't come in when someone's watching. They don't like to be seen.
James said nothing. He had no words left. He walked Dorothy back to her room. She was asleep in under a minute. He stood in her doorway for a long time. That night, no one died. 3 days later, Dorothy Hayes passed away in her sleep. Time of death, 3:12 in the morning. In the same night, 4 other residents died, all between 3 and 4 a.m., all in their rooms, all documented as natural causes. James sat at the nurse's station and stared at the empty corridor. It was the first time in 11 weeks that the east hallway was empty at 3:12. There was no one standing at the end of it anymore. There was no one to stand there. James quit 2 weeks after Dorothy died. Before he left, he requested access to the facility's records going back to 2014, the year Dorothy arrived. The administrator was reluctant. He said it was personal, that Dorothy had asked him to learn her history. It wasn't entirely a lie. He sat in the records room for 4 hours with a calculator and a legal pad. Over 58 months, Meadow Pines had recorded 107 deaths. For a facility of its size, that number was not unusual. But when James cross-referenced those deaths with the night shift logs, specifically with entries noting Dorothy standing in the east hallway, the numbers stopped being unremarkable. 89 deaths occurred on nights when Dorothy was logged in the corridor. 18 deaths occurred on nights she was not. James checked his math 3 times. He sat for a while without moving. And then he thought about the question he hadn't thought to ask her when she was alive. Dorothy arrived at Meadow Pines in March of 2014. She was there for 5 years before James ever saw her in that hallway. Which meant one thing: someone had been standing there before her. James Collins doesn't work in healthcare anymore. He told this story once to a friend who wrote it down. He said he doesn't talk about it often, not because he doesn't believe it happened, but because explaining it to people requires them to sit with something that most of us would rather not consider. The idea that death is not random, that it has a schedule, that something or some things arrive in advance and wait outside closed doors, and that the only thing standing between them and the people sleeping inside might be a woman in a white nightgown who has learned the rules of a game none of us know we're playing. I want to be clear. I cannot verify every detail of this account. James Collins may have misremembered. The numbers may have a statistical explanation I'm not qualified to provide. The human mind is extraordinarily good at finding patterns where there are none. But here is what I keep coming back to. In nursing homes and hospice facilities around the world, caregivers report the same thing over and over. In the days before a patient dies, they begin to see people who aren't there. They reach out to them. They talk to them. They seem, sometimes, to be in conversation with something invisible, just beyond the edge of the room. Medicine calls this terminal lucidity, or delirium, or the brain in the process of shutting down. But Dorothy Hayes didn't reach out to them. She stood between them and the people she shared a hallway with. Every night at 3:12, for 5 years. I don't know what Dorothy saw at the end of that hallway, but I think she saw something. And I think whatever it was, it knew she was watching. If you've worked nights in a care facility, or you've sat with someone in their final hours, I want to hear from you. Tell me what you've seen. Tell me what the people you were with said in those last days. The comment section is open. I'll be reading.